Hearthstone is a game for everyone. There is a lot of easy decks, there's a lot of difficult decks, and then there's the decks that really separate the casual players from the pro players. I'm talking about the decks where if you look at top 1000 legend, the win rate is so much higher than the rest of ladder because the average player at top 1000 legend can pilot the deck better than the average Hearthstone player. Have you ever asked yourself, what is the hardest deck to play in Hearthstone? And before we get to this video, let me know what you think with a comment down below. Now, in order for me to tell you what the hardest deck is to play, we first have to ask yourself what makes a deck hard to play. Now, this is a really complex question because from every single player, they could have a different opinion on what makes a deck harder to play. Maybe it's the amount of decisions they have to make in a turn, how complex the deck is to get to its win condition. But in my opinion, a deck is at its most challenging when it's the hardest to play it optimally. Now, for some comparison, Face Hunter can be seen as a pretty hard deck in some matchups, but on average, to play it optimally is not going to be as hard as, for instance, a combo deck. In other words, every single deck has decisions and they can have complex decisions, but to play the deck optimally and make the most optimal decision is the hardest part about playing Hearthstone. We saw a really good example of this with the end of United and Stormwind going into Fracture and Alterac Valley and played at the World Championship in 2021 with Garrot Rogue. The main idea of this deck is in order for you to find a Fishing Octobot and a Field Contact and draw through your entire deck while killing them in one turn with Guild Traders, Garrots, and Burn from hand. This sounds like an extremely easy thing to do until you realize there is so many different decisions you have to make every single turn. When do I get the mana cheat from Octobot? When do I start drawing cards with Field Contact? When do I go for the kill? All of these things add up to this deck's complexity. And the really interesting thing about this deck is that if you're a really good player with it, you can find lethals at turn 6 or turn 7, where the average player has to wait until about turn 8, turn 9, turn 10 to actually get the kill. The other really interesting thing about this deck is you can play for tempo, you can play for combo, you could play for value, you could do a lot of different stuff because this deck had so many decisions you had to make. And if you're doubting how complex this deck actually is, you should go watch pro players play this and go watch an average legend player play this. It is ridiculous to look at the comparison. As much as I think that deck is really hard to play, I still think there are two other decks that are much more complex than Garrot Rogue. Back in the day of Blackrock Mountain, we were introduced to a brand new card called Grim Patron that made one of the most interesting and complex board-centric combo decks we've ever seen. Grim Patron was a 5-mana 3/3 neutral minion. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon another Grim Patron. And the win condition for Patron Warrior was extremely simple. You play a Warsong Commander followed by a Frothing Berserker and then patrons in order for you to get your Frothing Berserker to enough in an attack to kill your opponent. The idea is extremely simple, but in order for you to actually play this optimally was increasingly hard depending on what the board state was. Because unlike Garrot Rogue, which has a ton of burn from hand, Patron Warrior did not really have the same thing. Sometimes it ran Grom, but a lot of it was a board-centric combo. And that's what made this deck so hard to play optimally, because you had to figure out ways in order for you to get your Frothing Berserker to a high enough attack, how to generate as many Grim Patrons, what weapon do I use, do I attack a previous turn to set up my Death's Bite, and I haven't even mentioned how you actually had to draw cards in this deck due to the fact that most of it would come through Acolyte of Pain or Battle Rage. I don't think I'm really doing this deck justice at the moment, so I'm just gonna let this play from Jab truly showcase the potential of this deck.
Do you want to take a stab at this math? So there's gonna be 2 Frothings and a Grim Patron.
There's no
Jab has all the time in the world. And Double Brawl, normally, you know, something that works out really well, not gonna matter really this game.
Yeah. And Fibonacci playing this intelligently, he's just not gonna play things.
Well, it could be intelligent if theoretically Jeb just went for it on an empty board. He would have 4 patrons, that's 12. He would have 2 Frothings, that's 16, and he'd have the Death's Bite, that's 20, and he'd have 2 Whirlwind effects, the first of which would only be on 4 minions. Okay, and there's an Inner Rage, so that makes things even higher. The 2 Whirlwinds would only be... The first one would only be 8 damage, or 10 damage with the Inner Rage.
I mean, he's going for it. He's going for it. Let's figure it out. I think if it's not lethal, it's definitely very close. And he spent the whole turn thinking about it. Did the math. A long time ago, I gave up trying to count when I was casting. Because when you're counting, you're not casting. Yep. It's gonna be interesting. We couldn't quite figure out all the math in time. We like to live it with you. I don't think he should play Unstable Ghoul. The extra patron would do more damage than the Unstable Ghoul. Yeah, he can't kill off his Unstable Ghoul. So could be a mistake there. We'll see. He might think that he has lethal regardless, which is a possibility. Well, if it doesn't end up being lethal, it's gonna be a brawl from Fibonacci. And Fibonacci would definitely have to swing back with Alex Raza. But, I mean, that's a lot of damage. 6 plus 2 Whirlwinds on 7 creatures. It looks like the rope stopped. Yep, so that's like Raza getting in there. Yeah, that's gonna be 16. Look, he's this one, he's like, yeah, the rope. I believe it's gonna be 16 times 2.
And on 31 health, that's 1 over.
Wow. That was so
And that's
close.
it. That's the match.
That's crazy. A quick 3-0.
Yeah, that deck was pretty ridiculous. Now, as ridiculous as that deck was, I still think there is one deck that is more complex than what Patron Warrior was. In the Boomsday project, we were introduced to a brand new priest archetype thanks to the card called Topsy Turvy. This was a combo deck that was built around test subject with a bunch of cheap spells, and the idea was to kill your test subject multiple times until you had enough resources to get the actual kill. I can't even explain to you how complex this deck could be, but someone actually built an online simulator just for you to try it in case you were curious. This deck really didn't see a lot of competitive play just because the complexity level, and honestly, it wasn't that great of a deck, but it definitely showcased how hard a deck is to play in Hearthstone.
Prepare for death.
Oh wait, I don't have Divine. What am I doing? Toast, stop. Toast, stop. You're missing Divine. Toast, what are you doing? You do not have Divine Spirit. This is not gonna go the way you think.
Now, if that clip alone doesn't showcase how complex this deck was to play, and that was just on ladder, imagine in a tournament setting when the pressure is on. This deck was wild. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed this one, go check out another one. You'll probably like it just as much. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe. I'll check you guys in the next one. You look fantastic.